Have you ever had a massive argument with your parents, only for them to walk into your room an hour later and silently hand you a plate of cut fruit? They aren't ignoring your pain. In their neurobiology, that fruit is a desperate attempt to save their own collapsing ego. Let me explain why your parents can never say, "I am sorry." Think about the last time you tried to tell your parents that they hurt you. You didn't yell. You didn't throw a tantrum. You approached them calmly, perhaps armed with the emotional vocabulary you have spent years developing in therapy. You used "I feel" statements. You tried to set a gentle boundary. You just wanted them to acknowledge a specific pain they caused. And how did they react? The atmosphere in the room likely shifted in a microsecond. Their defense mechanisms didn't just activate, they detonated. You might have heard the classic deflection, "Well, I guess I am just the worst mother in the world," then, or the ultimate trump card of the boomer generation, "I put a roof over your head. I gave you everything. What more do you possibly want from me?" In that moment, you are left completely paralyzed. The conversation is dead. The silence that follows is heavy, suffocating, and incredibly lonely. You are standing there, an independent adult, yet feeling exactly like a helpless child, wondering why a simple, three-word sentence, "I am sorry," is treated like a physical impossibility in your family tree. For years, you have probably internalized this. You told yourself they are just unreasonably stubborn or emotionally stunted, or that they simply do not care enough about your feelings to swallow their pride. You have spent countless nights exhausted, running on an endless treadmill of unresolved resentment, waiting for an apology that never arrives. But what if everything you thought you knew about their silence is entirely wrong? What if they aren't refusing to apologize out of malice or narcissism? We are about to look past the arguments at the dinner table and step directly into the hidden architecture of their minds. Because the terrifying truth is, for a generation raised in the shadows of the 20th century, apologizing isn't just uncomfortable. Neurologically speaking, to their brains, admitting fault feels like a death sentence. To understand why your parents are physically incapable of looking you in the eye and saying, "I hurt you," you have to understand that you are not talking to an emotional adult. You are talking to a biological survival mechanism that was constructed in the middle of the 20th century. Your parents were not born into the world of mental health days, trigger warnings, and therapy apps. They were born to the World War E generation, a cohort of men and women who came home from the front lines carrying unspeakable trauma, which they promptly buried under fresh concrete, GI Bill mortgages, and a desperate, unyielding demand for absolute order. In their households, vulnerability wasn't a tool for connection. Vulnerability was a structural weakness. If you cried, you were given a reason to cry. If you fell, you got back up before someone hit you for being careless. And then came their own childhoods. If you are a millennial or a Gen Z, your childhood fire drills involved walking quietly to the playground. Their childhood fire drills involved crouching under small wooden desks, lacing their hands behind their necks, and listening to air raid sirens scream across American suburban skies. They were taught, before they even learned long division, that the world could literally vanish in a blinding flash of nuclear fire at any given Tuesday afternoon. What does that do to a developing human brain? It permanently hotwires the amygdala, the brain's threat detection center. It locks the nervous system into a chronic, low-grade state of fight or flight. When you grow up in an environment where safety is an illusion, where authority figures are absolute, and where chaos is constantly waiting just beyond the white picket fence, your mind develops a very specific coping rule. Uncertainty is death. Mistakes are catastrophic. Maintain control at all costs. Now, fast forward 50 years. You sit across from your boomer parent at a coffee shop and you bring up something from your childhood. Maybe it was the time they embarrassed you in front of your friends, or the time they ignored your mental health, or the way they prioritized their job over your emotional needs. To you, this is a bid for repair. You are offering them an invitation to build a deeper, more honest adult relationship. But their brain does not hear an invitation. The moment you say, "You hurt me," their Cold War amygdala does not process it as a constructive conversation about feelings. It processes it as a siren sounding in the hallway. Their nervous system reacts to your criticism with the exact same neurochemical panic as if a Soviet missile were inbound. To their brain, admitting a mistake means the defense structure has failed. It means the fortress they built to keep the chaotic world out is crumbling. They don't hear, "I want to be closer to you." They hear, "You are unsafe. You failed. You are exposed." And when a person's nervous system is trained to believe that admitting fault equals total destruction, they will do whatever it takes to silence the siren. They will shut down, they will counterattack, or they will rewrite history right in front of your eyes. The rigid defensiveness that drives you insane isn't a personality flaw. It is a 50-year-old survival armor that they have forgotten how to take off. Think about how strange and disproportionate their reaction often is. You bring up a seemingly minor grievance, perhaps a highly critical comment they made about your weight, a time they dismissed your career choice, or a moment they compared you to a more successful sibling. You aren't asking them to go to prison. You aren't putting them on trial. You are simply asking for a little bit of accountability. A simple, "I'm sorry, I shouldn't have said that." But instead of a mild apology, they explode. They act as if you have just taken a knife and plunged it directly into their chest. Why the theatrics? Why does a level 1 criticism trigger a level 10 emotional meltdown? Why do they immediately flip the script and accuse you of being ungrateful? To understand this, we have to look at one of the most powerful and destructive forces in human psychology: cognitive dissonance. Cognitive dissonance is the intense mental agony that happens when a person holds two contradictory beliefs about themselves at the exact same time. The human brain absolutely hates this state. It literally feels like physical pain, a dangerous internal friction. To stop the pain, the brain must instantly destroy one of those beliefs. Now, apply this psychological mechanism to your parents. You have to understand how their entire identity was constructed. Your boomer parents did not grow up in an era of self-discovery. They didn't get to take gap years to find their passion. They didn't go to retreats to heal their inner child. And they certainly didn't have the luxury of prioritizing their mental health. Their entire existence, their entire self-worth, was built on one single, unwavering pillar: sacrifice. They were the providers. They broke their backs. They endured loveless marriages. They tolerated abusive bosses. They swallowed their own dreams. And they deeply suppressed their own trauma, all to make sure there was food on the table and a roof over your head. Their internal narrative. The story they have told themselves in the mirror every single day for 40 years is, "I am a good parent because I sacrificed absolutely everything for my child." That is not just something they did. That is who they are. Their sacrifice is their identity. So, what happens when you sit across from them at the dining table and say, "The way you raised me caused me psychological pain"? You are introducing a new piece of information that directly collides with their core identity. This is where the cognitive dissonance violently rips them apart. They are suddenly forced to hold two conflicting thoughts. I am a selfless hero who sacrificed everything to be a good parent, and I caused my child deep emotional trauma. Both of these statements cannot be true in their mind. For you, admitting a mistake is just a behavior correction. It shows emotional maturity. But for them, because their entire identity is inextricably fused to their sacrifice, admitting a mistake triggers a total ego collapse. Their brain translates your mild criticism into a catastrophic verdict. Their subconscious hears, "If I admit that I hurt you, it means I failed. And if I failed at raising you, then my decades of sacrifice were completely worthless. My pain was for nothing. My entire life was a lie." This is the dark truth behind their reaction. The reason they look at you with such venom, the reason they suddenly play the ultimate victim, the reason they scream, "I gave you everything!" is not because they are trying to manipulate you, at least not consciously. It is because their brain is in a state of absolute psychological emergency. The brain acts like an autoimmune system. Just as white blood cells attack a foreign virus, their ego attacks your truth to protect the host. They are fighting for their life. Or rather, they are fighting to keep their identity intact. Refusing to apologize is not an act of arrogance. It is an act of desperate psychological self-preservation. They have to make you the villain. They have to call you overly sensitive. They have to reject your reality entirely. Because if they accept your reality, their own reality shatters into a million unfixable pieces. They would rather lose their connection with you today than face the devastating, soul-crushing grief of their own past. So, if their brain strictly forbids them from saying the words, "I am sorry," to prevent a total ego collapse, what happens when they actually realize they went too far? What happens when the screaming stops, the house falls dead silent, and deep down, even their ironclad defense mechanism knows they crossed a line? They execute the only apology ritual they were ever taught: weaponized sacrifice. This brings us back to the plate of cut fruit. Or perhaps in your family, it is a sudden, unprompted $50 transfer to your bank account. Or maybe it is the sound of aggressive, angry vacuuming outside your bedroom door at 7 in the morning. These are not random acts of chores or generosity. These are highly complex, non-verbal peace treaties. To decode this, you must understand that for the boomer generation, love was never modeled as an emotional state. Love was a physical labor. Love was a transaction. You showed love by enduring suffering and providing tangible resources. I worked a 60-hour week so you could have braces. I cooked a hot dinner every night. I paid for your college. In their neural pathways, physical provision and emotional love are the exact same thing. Therefore, when an argument occurs and a rupture happens in the relationship, they do not know how to repair it with emotional vulnerability. They only know how to repair it with physical labor. But there is a dark side to this transactional love, because they view their physical sacrifices as the ultimate currency. They use it as an invisible, impenetrable shield to deflect any emotional demands you make. This is where the sacrifice becomes weaponized through toxic guilt tripping. When you sit down and say, "Mum, Dad, the way you spoke to me yesterday was incredibly disrespectful and it hurt my feelings." You are asking for an emotional debt to be settled. But because they cannot pay that emotional debt, they immediately pull out their physical ledger. They will look at you and say, "How dare you call me disrespectful? Do you know how many night shifts I worked to buy you that car? Do you know what I gave up for you?" They are aggressively changing the currency of the conversation. They are taking your valid emotional grievance and burying it under a mountain of their historical physical sacrifices. Suddenly, the argument is no longer about the cruel thing they said yesterday. It is about how ungrateful you are for the roof over your head 15 years ago. They have successfully guilt-tripped you into dropping your demand for an apology, making you feel like a spoiled, unappreciative child just for wanting basic emotional respect. But let us look at the quieter moments, the moments when the argument is over and they walk into your room holding that plate of perfectly sliced apples or peeled oranges. It is incredibly frustrating, isn't it? You want them to sit on the edge of the bed, look you in the eyes, and take accountability. You want a psychological repair. Instead, they offer you carbohydrates. It feels passive-aggressive. It feels like they are sweeping your pain under the rug. But if you look at it through the lens of neuroscience and generational trauma, that plate of fruit is a tragic masterpiece. That fruit is them saying, "My brain will not allow me to say I am wrong, because if I am wrong, I am a failure. But I am terrified of losing you, so I performed a physical labor. I carefully removed the skin from this fruit to make it easier for you to consume, because providing for you is the only way I know how to prove you matter to me." It is not the apology you want. It is not the apology you deserve. But it is a bitter, profound realization. That plate of cut fruit is the absolute highest limit of remorse their nervous system can process. Have you ever noticed how the mere mention of the word therapy can make your parents visibly tense up? Or how using modern psychological terms like setting boundaries, gaslighting, or healing my inner child in front of them does not invite understanding, but rather sparks immediate, fiery defensiveness? They act as if your attempt to heal your own mind is a direct, calculated insult to their parenting. To understand why this happens, we have to look at the fundamental difference in how your two generations were neurologically programmed to define the concept of safety. Every human brain operates on a hierarchy of needs. For your boomer parents, raised by survivors of the Great Depression and World War E, the brain's ultimate, non-negotiable objective was physical safety and resource acquisition. Their neurological software was coded in an era where failure meant physical ruin. Therefore, a safe environment, in their minds, is defined purely by tangible metrics. A locked front door, a stable paycheck, a full refrigerator, and a family unit that stays together regardless of how miserable everyone is behind closed doors. If those physical boxes were checked, their brain registered success. Emotional fulfillment was not a requirement for survival. In fact, focusing too much on feelings was considered a dangerous distraction from the hard work of staying alive. Now, look at your generation. Millennials and Gen Z were largely raised in an era of unprecedented physical security. You didn't have to worry about being drafted into a world war or starving through a global depression, because your baseline physical needs were met. Your brain naturally evolved to seek the next level of human development, emotional safety and psychological well-being. This evolutionary shift is exactly where the generational collision occurs. You and your parents are not just having a disagreement. You are operating on two completely incompatible neurological operating systems. When you sit down and say to your mother, "I need to set a boundary with you because your comments about my weight are affecting my mental health," you are speaking the advanced language of emotional safety. But your mother's brain does not possess the software to decode that language. Her brain filters your words through her survival-based operating system. To her, the word boundary does not mean a healthy psychological parameter. To a brain wired for physical survival and pack loyalty, a boundary translates as a threat of abandonment. It sounds like rebellion. It sounds like you are saying, "You did not provide for me, you failed as a protector, and now I am cutting you off." This is the empathy deficit. It is not that they are completely incapable of empathy. It is that their empathy is strictly confined to the physical realm. If you break your leg, they will drive you to the hospital, pay the medical bill, and cook you soup for a week. They will mobilize like an elite military unit to fix a physical problem. But if you tell them your heart is broken, or your soul is exhausted, or that they have caused you psychological distress, they freeze. They panic. They become angry because you are demanding a resource, emotional attunement, that they were never taught how to manufacture. Think of it in terms of technology. You have spent the last decade going to therapy, reading psychology books, and upgrading your emotional intelligence. You are essentially running on the sleek, highly advanced empathy software of iOS 17. You understand nuance, emotional regulation, and trauma responses. But when you try to have a deep, restorative conversation with your parents, you are trying to install that iOS 17 software onto a rigid, survival-based operating system built on MS-DOS in 1965. It is never going to work. The hardware simply cannot support the software. When they stare at you blankly, or when they explode in anger when you use therapy talk, it is just their system crashing. The tragic reality of the empathy deficit is realizing that your parents are not withholding the emotional validation you crave because they want to punish you. They are withholding it because they literally do not have it to give. You are begging a person who only speaks the language of survival to write you a poem in the language of emotional intimacy. Once you truly comprehend this massive neurological mismatch, a profound shift begins to happen within you. The anger you have carried for years starts to lose its sharp edge, replaced by a strange, quiet realization. The problem was never that you were unlovable, or that you didn't explain your feelings clearly enough. The problem is that you have been waiting for a system update that is never going to arrive. So where does this leave you? If you are still waiting for that magical, cinematic moment where they sit down on the edge of your bed, look you deeply in the eyes, and finally offer the validating apology you have been dreaming of, you have to stop, right now. Because every single day you spend waiting for an emotional software update that their brain cannot process, you are actively handing them the keys to your own psychological stability. You do not have to instantly forgive them. You certainly do not have to pretend the trauma they caused wasn't real. But you must transition from a state of burning resentment into what psychologists call objective compassion. You have to start looking at them not as the omnipotent protectors who maliciously failed you, but as profoundly limited human beings who are permanently trapped inside the survival mechanisms of the 20th century. They are prisoners of a history they never bothered to heal from. And once you see their defensive armor for exactly what it is, a profound and liberating realization washes over you. The biggest, most important apology you will ever receive is the one you owe to yourself. You owe yourself a massive apology for spending the last decade of your life begging for water at a completely dry well. You owe yourself an apology for ever believing that their biological inability to say the words "I am sorry" somehow meant that your pain was not real or valid. Your pain was always valid. They just lacked the neurological capacity to bear witness to it. You are finally allowed to mourn the emotionally intelligent parents you desperately deserved, so that you can peacefully accept the emotionally limited parents you actually have. You can set your boundaries today, and here is the beautiful secret about boundaries. They do not require the other person's understanding, agreement, or permission to work. A boundary is never about controlling their behavior. It is entirely about protecting your peace. The next time they hand you that silent plate of cut fruit after a massive argument, you do not have to scream. You do not have to fight. You can simply look at it, recognize the tragic limitation of their nervous system, say thank you, and walk away with your peace completely intact. If this psychological breakdown finally gave you the closure you've been searching for all these years, please hit the subscribe button right now. We dive deep into the neuroscience of generational trauma and toxic family dynamics every single week to help you break these cycles for good. And before you go, I want to hear from you. What is the cut fruit apology in your specific family? Is it aggressive morning vacuuming? A random cash transfer? A text about the weather? Tell me your story in the comments below, because I promise you, you are not alone in this.